Chapter 1. The Quiet One. Imogen Hale had been reading Vampire Minds for 6 years, and the most surprising thing she had learned was that immortal apex predators spent an extraordinary amount of time thinking about cheese. Not metaphorical cheese. Literal cheese. The vampire she was currently sitting across from in the foyer of 14 Harrow Lane, a 300-year-old named Renaud, who served as the household's head of security, was thinking, with great focus and genuine distress, about the fact that he could no longer eat brie. 300 years, and brie was the thing that haunted him. Imogen kept her face professionally neutral. She was good at that. 6 years of hearing what people actually thought while they said something entirely different had given her a poker face that could survive a hurricane. "The estate assessment will take approximately 3 days," she said, opening her tablet. "The king is aware." Renaud's thoughts shifted. Who sends a human to assess a vampire household? She is going to get eaten. Not by me. The brie thing is unrelated. I'll need access to all common areas, the grounds, and any spaces used for formal gatherings. She will not get access to the wine cellar. The wine cellar is mine. The wine cellar, too, if there is one, Imogen added, because she couldn't help herself. Renaud's face did not change. His thoughts screamed. She followed him through the house, which was the kind of place that had been beautiful in 1820 and had been carefully maintained ever since by someone who cared about architecture and did not care about trends. The furniture was from 6 different centuries and somehow worked together. The lighting was low. The ceilings were high enough that you could feel the air moving above you, slow and old. Every room she entered gave her another mind. The housekeeper in the east corridor. The stain. The stain. It has been there since 1987, and no one will let me replace the carpet. It is blood. It is obviously blood. The king says it adds character. Blood does not add character. A young vampire by the library door, composing a sonnet. The moon, she hangs. No. The moon, she burns. Worse. The moon, she. This is the worst poem ever written. I have been alive for 90 years. Surely I should be better at this by now. A groundskeeper passing a window, thinking about his mother, who had been dead for 140 years, with a tenderness that made Imogen's chest ache. She would have liked these roses. She always liked the yellow ones. She catalogued all of it, filed it away. "You seem distracted," Renaud said. "Just listening." "To what?" "I don't hear anything." That is because you are the thing I am listening to, Imogen thought, but what she said was, "Old houses settle. You learn to tune in." She is strange, Renaud thought. Not unpleasant, but strange. Like someone who is always having a second conversation. He wasn't wrong. Grayson Hale Consulting, her mother's firm, now hers, provided security and risk assessment for vampire households that needed human world expertise. What their clients did not know was that the firm's competitive advantage was not expertise. It was Imogen's ability to hear every thought in a vampire's head as clearly as if they were speaking it aloud. She had been able to do this since she was 19. No one had ever explained why. Vampire Minds broadcast on a frequency that human brains were not equipped to receive, except, apparently, hers. Human thoughts were background noise. Vampire thoughts were high-definition surround sound. And after 6 years of listening, she had learned that immortal predators worried about the same things mortals did, just with more centuries of accumulated regret. Renaud led her to the study on the 2nd floor, knocked once, and opened the door. "Miss Hale," he announced. "The security consultant. She is small. She will definitely get eaten, perhaps after the gathering." The study was warm and dark and lined with books that looked like they had been read, not displayed. A fire burned in the grate, and sitting behind the desk, very still, in a dark wool suit that fit like it had been made for him by someone who owed him a personal debt, was the vampire king of the Eastern Seaboard Territory, Anselm Winter. Imogen had read his file. 412 years old, controlled every vampire household east of the Mississippi through a combination of strategic patience and the kind of quiet authority that made other vampires decide, independently and without discussion, that disagreeing with him was not worth the effort. He had a reputation for fairness, restraint, and the absolute annihilation of anyone who mistook that restraint for weakness. She walked into the room. She reached for his mind, and heard nothing. She stopped, physically stopped, one foot in front of the other, in the middle of the study, like someone had pressed pause. Nothing. Not quiet, not muffled, not the low hum she got from very disciplined vampires. Absolute, cathedral-deep, oceanic silence. For the first time in 6 years, Imogen Hale was standing in a room with a vampire, and she had no idea what he was thinking. He looked up. His eyes were the color of old iron, gray with a warmth underneath that you'd miss if you weren't looking. His face was composed, watchful, and completely still in the way that vampire faces were still. Not relaxed, but held. Like a sculpture that had decided to wait. Miss Hale. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had been choosing its words carefully for 4 centuries. Thank you for coming on short notice. Of course. She was staring. She could not stop staring because her entire nervous system was screaming, "Why can't I hear him?" And the professional part of her brain was screaming, "Sit down and act normal, you absolute disaster." She sat down. She opened her tablet. She acted normal. Your firm comes highly recommended, he said. 3 of my neighboring territories have used Grayson Hale for security assessments. Each reported that your findings were, and I quote, unsettlingly accurate. We're thorough. Thorough is a polite word for what they described. He studied her. The attention was precise and patient and slightly unnerving, like being examined by a painting that had opinions. They said you identified internal threats that their own security had missed. Loyalty issues, concealed alliances, vulnerabilities that were not visible on any inspection. People reveal more than they think they do. This was the truest thing she had ever said. You just have to know how to listen. I am told I am a good listener. I'm better. Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement exactly. Interest. The kind of interest a 400-year-old creature reserves for things that genuinely surprise him. The gathering is in 4 days, he said. Approximately 60 guests from 12 territories. Several would like me removed from power. I need your assessment before they arrive. I'll need full access. You'll have it. Piers will be your primary contact. On cue, a vampire appeared in the doorway. Tall, sandy-haired, and radiating the energy of someone who had once been an optimist, had been corrected by the universe repeatedly, and was now engaged in a careful détente with hope. Perhaps this one will go well, Piers was thinking. Perhaps this assessment will be orderly and professional and nothing will catch fire. Perhaps the king will not develop a personal complication. It has been 23 years since the last personal complication. That is a good run. Perhaps. Piers, Anselm said. Please show Miss Hale to her quarters. Oh no. He used the tone. That is the tone he uses when something has already gone wrong and he has not yet identified what. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Of course, Your Majesty. Pierce's face was perfectly pleasant. His thoughts were a 5-alarm fire. Imogen stood. She extended her hand to the king because that was what you did, and because 6 years of reading minds had made handshakes her least favorite social convention. She always got a flash of something, but you couldn't refuse a handshake with a vampire king without explaining why, and she did not have an explanation that didn't begin with, I can hear what everyone in your house is thinking. Anselm Winter took her hand, and the silence broke. Not into thoughts, into feeling. A wave of emotion so precise and so deep that Imogen's vision went white at the edges. Not words, not images. Pure, undiluted emotional state. 400 years of it compressed into a single handshake. He was tired. Not the tiredness of a long day, the tiredness of a long existence. Of performing composure for so many centuries that the performance had become indistinguishable from the man. Underneath the tiredness, a sharp, attentive curiosity that was looking directly at her. And underneath that, so far down she almost missed it, something that felt like the first green thing pushing through snow. Something he didn't have a name for yet. Something new. The handshake lasted 2 seconds. She let go. Her hand was shaking. His was perfectly still and cold, 15 degrees, maybe less, and she could still feel the phantom of his emotions like a bell that had been struck and was still ringing. "Are you all right?" he asked. His face showed nothing. His voice showed nothing. But she had felt what was underneath, and it was not nothing. "Fine," she swallowed. "Your hands are cold." "Yes," he said. "They always are." She left the study. Piers walked beside her. His thoughts were a running catalogue of disaster scenarios. She touched his hand and went pale. She touched his hand and went pale. This is the personal complication. I knew it. I knew it! 23 years. We almost made it to 25. Imogen said nothing. She followed Piers to her room, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed her still shaking hand against her knee. She had read 1,000 vampire minds. She had never felt one. And the one she couldn't hear was the one whose feelings, she was beginning to suspect, were going to be a problem. Chapter 2. The Blue Tooth. By the second morning, Imogen had learned 3 things about Anselm Winter's household. First, the vampires were genuinely anxious about the gathering, and their anxieties were specific, granular, and occasionally hilarious. Renaud was worried about the seating chart. The young poet by the library was worried that his sonnet, now at 6 lines and still in trouble, would not be ready in time for a recital that no one had asked him to give. The housekeeper was worried about the stain, which was apparently not wine but blood from a diplomatic incident in 1987 that had been insufficiently addressed. Second, Anselm Winter was a good king. She knew this not because of his reputation or his manner, but because every single vampire in his household thought about him with some variation of respect that shaded into genuine affection. Renaud, who thought about Brie and security in roughly equal measure, also thought about the king with the kind of loyalty that doesn't get manufactured. Piers, whose optimism was a beautiful ruin, thought about Anselm the way you think about someone you have watched carry an impossible weight for a very long time. Third, she could not stop accidentally touching him. The house was old, and the corridors were narrow, and Anselm Winter apparently did not believe in announcing himself. He appeared in doorways. He materialized behind her in the library. He handed her documents and his cold fingers brushed hers. And every single time, she got the flash. The second touch. She was reaching for a book on the same shelf. His hand arrived first. Contact, half a second. Emotion, amusement. Something had struck him as funny. She looked up. His face was perfectly composed. "You seem interested in the security logs from 1974, he said. "They're thorough. Someone was very detail-oriented." "That would be me. I find detail calming." A pause. "You look as if you have a question." She had 7 questions, all of which began with, "Why can you feel things this deeply and show absolutely nothing?" And ended with, "And why am I the only one who knows?" "How do you feel about the wireless situation in this house?" she asked instead. He blinked. It was, she was learning, his only tell. One blink longer than necessary when something surprised him. I beg your pardon? The Wi-Fi, the internet connection. It's non-existent in the East Wing and spotty everywhere else. I need to upload my assessment data and I can't get a signal. Piers manages he paused, the technological matters. Piers told me the password is Winter1624, and the router hasn't been restarted since 2019. I don't know what a router is. It's the box that gives you internet. There is a box? There is a box. He considered this with the gravity of a man evaluating a treaty. And this box has stopped working. It needs to be restarted, unplugged and plugged back in. That is the solution? Removing its power and restoring it? Yes. That is also how you fix a vampire who's been daggered. I find the parallel concerning. He considered the blinking router light. In the old courts, we had binding oaths for matters of security. A vampire who swore one staked his life on the truth of it. Far more reliable than your Bluetooth. She laughed before she could stop herself. He looked at her, a long, still look, and she felt the edge of something even without touching him. Like his silence had a warmth to it that leaked through proximity. They found the router in a cupboard in the hallway, buried under what appeared to be several decades of accumulated correspondence. Anselm stood behind her while she unplugged it, and his nearness was a physical thing, not threatening, not warm, just present. Like standing next to a very old wall. While it restarts, she said, I also need to connect my phone to the household's Bluetooth speaker for the assessment recordings. The Bluetooth. Bluetooth. It's a wireless technology. It lets devices talk to each other without wires. He was quiet for a long moment. You are telling me, he said, slowly, that your telephone sends invisible signals through the air, through walls, to any device within range, without a wire, without a messenger, without any physical connection. Yes. To anyone? To any compatible device. He looked at the router. He looked at her phone. He looked at the walls. That, he said, is a catastrophic security vulnerability. It has a range of about 30 feet. 30 feet of unmonitored invisible communication. In my house, where 60 political adversaries will be gathering in 3 days. He straightened. How long has this existed? Since about 1998. I have had invisible signals passing through my walls for 28 years and no one has mentioned this to me. Piers appeared in the doorway. His thoughts, oh good, he's found out about Bluetooth. This was going to happen eventually. At least it isn't the cloud. Do not mention the cloud. Your Majesty, Piers. Did you know about the Bluetooth? Bluetooth, sir, one word, and yes. And the invisible signals. Also yes. Why was I not informed? Because you refused to learn how the television remote worked until 2014, and we chose our battles. It seemed non-urgent at the time. Anselm looked at Imogen. Is there anything else being transmitted invisibly through my house that I should know about? Your smart thermostat is connected to the internet, she said, so technically your heating system is online. He absorbed this. My heating system is online. It can be controlled from a phone. Someone could control the temperature of my house from a telephone. Theoretically, yes. From anywhere? From anywhere with an internet connection. He turned to Piers. Disconnect the heating system from the Bluetooth immediately. It's not connected to Bluetooth, sir. It's connected to Wi-Fi. Disconnect it from everything. Piers left. His thoughts. I am going to need more wine. Is there wine in the cellar? Renaud guards the cellar. I will have to negotiate. Perhaps today will still be fine. Perhaps He stopped himself. No, today will not be fine. Adjust expectations accordingly. Imogen was smiling. She could feel it on her face and she could not stop it. Anselm looked at her. His expression did not change. But he said, very quietly, "You are laughing at me." "I'm smiling. There's a difference. In my experience, one precedes the other. In your experience, how much experience do you have with people laughing at you?" "Very little. I am told it is an occupational hazard of being terrifying." "You're not terrifying." This time, the blink lasted 3 beats. Something shifted behind his eyes, a crack in the iron composure, just for a moment, and she didn't need to touch him to know what it meant. Nobody had said that to him in a very long time. That evening, she witnessed the feeding. She was in the corridor outside the private study, checking the window locks. Actual security work, the kind she did when she needed to stop thinking about his silence. When the door opened and a woman stepped out. Human, mid-30s, calm-faced. She walked past Imogen with a small nod, and her thoughts were a kaleidoscope of sensation that Imogen caught like a wave breaking over a seawall. The woman was thinking about the feeding she had just participated in, not in words, in impressions. The stillness of his hands, the careful precision, the overwhelming sensation of being known for the duration. Not her thoughts, not her secrets, just her physical presence consumed and valued and then gently released. It was the most intimate thing Imogen had ever eavesdropped on. She pressed her back against the corridor wall and closed her eyes. The donor's thoughts faded as the woman moved further away, but the echo stayed. The tenderness of it, the control. The absolute restraint in every moment, not suppressing hunger but channeling it into something that left the donor feeling honored rather than used. She opened her eyes. Anselm was standing in the doorway of the study. He was standing in the doorway. The predator's stillness, the one that meant something was being decided. His jaw was tight, a muscle worked at his temple, once. His eyes were darker than usual, deeper gray going almost black. "I apologize," he said. "You were not meant to be in this corridor." "It's my job to be in every corridor." "Then perhaps I should have scheduled the corridor." A pause, the composure resettling. "You look pale." "I'm fine." "You are not fine, your breathing changed." "You can hear my breathing?" "From the next room, yes. Is that also a security vulnerability you plan to flag?" She almost laughed, almost. "Did you just make a joke about predator hearing?" "I don't make jokes. I make observations that others find uncomfortable." A pause. "Did you hear something?" She held his gaze. His eyes were darker than usual. The post-feeding shift, deeper gray going almost black at the edges. "I hear everything," she said. And then, because honesty was the only thing she had left when his mind was closed to her. "Not from you, but from everyone else in this house." He stood very still. The kind of still that, in a vampire, meant something was being decided. "You hear their thoughts," he said, not a question. "Yes. All of them. All of them. Every vampire I've ever met. Their thoughts, their anxieties, their memories, in real time, since I was 19. The silence between them was not his silence, his usual deep oceanic quiet. This was a different silence. The silence of 2 people standing on either side of a truth that changes everything. "But not mine," he said. "Not yours. You're the first vampire in 6 years whose mind I can't hear." "Why?" "I don't know." He stepped toward her, 1 step. The corridor was narrow, and now the distance between them was the width of a breath. She could feel the cold radiating off him. 15 degrees of ancient temperature. And she could see the fine detail of his face up close. The pale skin with its faint luminosity. The gray eyes watching her with an attention that had nothing to do with hunger, and everything to do with recognition. He raised his hand, slowly. She watched it come toward her face with the kind of terrified fascination you bring to something you know will hurt and want anyway. His fingers stopped 3 inches from her cheek and stayed there. The predator stillness, the jaw working, the centuries of restraint visible in the precise distance his hand maintained. Close enough to almost feel, far enough to preserve the choice. "If I touched you right now," he said very quietly, "what would you feel?" "Everything you won't say?" His hand dropped. He stepped back. The composed mask resettled like water finding its level. "If I were one of you," she said quietly, "I could hear you all the time. If someone turned me, the bond channels might open fully. And I don't know if I would still be able to hear anyone at all. The ability is human. Turn me and it might die." She looked at him. "So the one solution to not hearing you would cost me the ability to hear everything else." He absorbed this. She watched him file it away the way he filed everything. Carefully, precisely, into a place he would revisit at 3 in the morning when no one was watching. "Forgive me," he said. "I was not thinking." "That's the problem," she said, and her voice was not steady. "I can't tell." Chapter 3. The Gathering. The evening of the gathering, Imogen wore a dark green dress that she had brought specifically because Piers had mentioned the event was formal, and she sat in an alcove off the main hall where she could see every arrival without being seen herself. The thoughts arrived before the vampires did. The first delegation, 4 vampires from the Southern Territory, 3 of them thinking, "I hate travel. I have hated travel since the invention of the stagecoach. Somehow it has gotten worse." The 4th was mentally rehearsing a speech about territorial restructuring that happened to benefit him specifically. "Colleagues, I propose..." No. "Distinguished members..." Better. In the spirit of... Perfect. Nobody can argue with spirit. The Great Lakes delegation, their leader thinking, "These shoes are a mistake. I have lived for 400 years and I have learned nothing about footwear." And her second in command, thinking about the Southern delegate's wife, with whom he'd had an affair in 1953 that had never technically ended. "She looks well." Does she look well? She looks well. I should not notice. I am noticing. The third delegation brought Margaret. Imogen knew her by reputation, 600 years old, former council elder, fanatically private, and possessed of a memory that made filing cabinets look unreliable. Margaret entered the hall with the posture of a woman who expected the architecture to straighten up in her presence. Her thoughts came in layered Old French and modern German, and Imogen's translation was spotty, but the thrust was clear. This household is not secure. The king has hired a human. A human in a vampire house is a breach.
Not because she is dangerous, because she is mortal. And mortals tell other mortals. And the last time mortals knew about us, they burned 3 covens in Cologne. And I watched from the bell tower, and I have not forgotten, and I will never forget. Imogen looked away. That memory was not hers to hold. She is afraid, Imogen realized. She is always afraid. 600 years, and the fear hasn't faded. 60 vampires in one room, 60 minds broadcasting at full volume. Imogen pressed her fingers against her temples and breathed. Renaud was thinking about the seating chart, which had been finalized, altered, refinalized, and was now in its 4th iteration because the Southern delegate refused to sit near windows. The young poet, who had apparently finished his sonnet at 11 lines and decided it was a modernist statement, was thinking about whether this counted as a creative achievement or a failure. Piers was thinking, 14 minutes in, no incidents. This is better than the 2003 gathering. In 2003, there was a fire by minute 7. Perhaps, no, do not hope. Hoping is a trap.
And through all the noise, one mind was silent. Anselm sat at the head of the long table, and the room oriented around him like iron filings around a magnet. He is doing the silence, Renaud was thinking from the far corner. The strategic silence. He learned it from a Medici. Everyone is terrified. Excellent. Imogen pressed her lips together. She was not going to laugh in the alcove during a formal dinner. She was a professional. The human is smiling, Piers noted from across the hall. She is smiling at the king's silence. Nobody smiles at the king's silence. This is new data. Filing under complications, inevitable. She watched Anselm from her alcove, and she could not read him, and it was maddening. The conspiracy announced itself 43 minutes into the formal dinner. Imogen was scanning the room, delegate by delegate, thought by thought. Threat, neutral, friendly, neutral, thinking about shoes, thinking about the affair, neutral, thinking about trade routes, neutral. She stopped. The delegate from the Western Territory, 3 seats to the left of center. Surface thoughts. Lovely wine. Is this the 1987? Excellent vintage. Underneath, the vote will be called before the 3rd course. Margaret will second it. She doesn't know what she's seconding. She thinks it's a censure motion. It's a territory challenge. By the time she realizes, the Eastern delegates will have committed. He'll have to respond publicly. His composure will crack. It always does. They always crack when it's personal. Imogen's blood went cold. Stay calm, she told herself. You are a professional. You have heard worse. You have not heard worse. This is the worst. Stay calm. She looked at Anselm. His face showed nothing. His mind gave her nothing. She had no way to reach him. She pulled out her phone, typed a message, held it under the table until she caught Piers's eye, then tilted the screen so he could read it. 3rd from left, Western delegation. Challenge coming before 3rd course. Not censure, territory grab. Margaret being used as cover. Piers read it. His face did not change. His thoughts. Oh no. Oh, this is the 2003 gathering. This is exactly the 2003 gathering. Where is the fire extinguisher? He stood, walked behind the king's chair, and leaned down. A word. 2 words. Anselm's expression did not change, but his hand, resting on the arm of his chair, went still. Not composed still. Predator still. The kind of still that meant the thing wearing a man's face had just reminded itself what it actually was. The Western delegate called for recognition to speak. Anselm granted it with a nod. The delegate began his motion. It was well constructed, carefully worded, and designed to sound like a reasonable administrative proposal while actually being a direct challenge to the king's territorial authority. Anselm listened. He did not interrupt. He did not react. He sat absolutely motionless for the duration of the 4-minute speech. And Imogen could feel every other vampire in the room growing more afraid with every second of his silence. When the delegate finished, Anselm said, "Thank you. Is there a second?" The room held its breath. Margaret shifted in her seat. The delegate's mind screamed, "She'll second it. We discussed this. She agreed to second it. Why isn't she?" But Margaret was looking at Anselm with 600 years of political instinct, and whatever she saw made her stay silent. The motion died without a second. Anselm dismissed the delegate's proposal with a single sentence that was so politely devastating that Imogen committed it to memory for future professional use. The dinner resumed. The 3rd course arrived. Piers's thoughts. No fire, no fire. This is better than 2003. After the dinner, the delegations dispersed into smaller groups. The Southern delegates were arguing about trade routes. The Great Lakes contingent was arguing about the shoe situation. Piers was thinking, 67 minutes without a political crisis. This is a record. I should write this down. No, writing it down will jinx it. But I want to remember this feeling. Is this what hope feels like? No. Hope is a trap, but perhaps… Piers, Imogen murmured as she passed him. Yes? Stop hoping. You'll jinx it. His face went white. How did she know I was hoping? I was hoping, silently. She left him to his existential crisis and found a quiet corridor where she could lean against the wall and press the heels of her hands against her eyes. 60 vampires thinking at full volume for 3 hours had left her feeling like she'd been sandblasted from the inside. Then Anselm appeared. How did you know? His voice came from her left. She hadn't heard him approach. Of course she hadn't. No thoughts to announce him. She lowered her hands. I'm good at reading people. You're more than good at reading people. You knew the exact seat, the exact delegate, and the exact nature of the threat before it materialized. That is not intuition. It's my job. It's extraordinary, and I would like to know how. She looked at him. The corridor was lit by a single lamp, and in its warm light the angles of his face were sharper, the pallor of his skin more visible, the stillness more pronounced. He looked like something from another century that had wandered into this one and found it lacking. Not tonight, she said. I have a headache that encompasses all 60 of your guests, and I would very much like to stop hearing about the seating chart. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the ghost of one. Renault's seating chart has been a matter of some contention. Renault's seating chart has been a matter of some obsession. He has been thinking about it non-stop for 3 days. It is the loudest seating chart in recorded history. He studied her. You said that as if you could hear him thinking about it. She held his gaze. Too long, too honest. Slip of the tongue. You don't have those. Everyone has those. You don't. He stepped closer. Not the predator step, the human one. The one that said, I am choosing to be near you. You are the most precise person I have met in 400 years. Every word you speak is chosen. You do not slip. The space between them was shrinking. The cold radiated off him, and she could feel it against the bare skin of her arms, like standing at the edge of a lake in winter. He reached out and took her wrist. The flash came like a wave, his gratitude for the warning, his fear, not for himself, not for his territory, but for her. The sharp, precise fear that someone in that room had been watching her as closely as she was watching them, and that her ability to see what no one else could see made her the most valuable and the most vulnerable person in his household. And underneath it, the thing she had felt before, the green shoot pushing through snow. Except now it was bigger. Now it had a name he still wouldn't use. Now it was aimed directly at her. And it was terrifying in its certainty. Your heart is racing, he said. His thumb was against her pulse point. He could feel it. Of course he could. I know what my heart is doing. It's very fast. Stop listening to my heart. She pulled her wrist free. He let her go immediately, hands dropping to his sides, and the composed mask resettled. Apologies, he said. Don't apologize, just stop being able to hear my pulse. It's very invasive. I cannot stop being able to hear your pulse. I can stop mentioning it. That would be great. She turned and walked away. She made it 12 steps before she heard, behind her, very quiet. It's fast because of me. She didn't turn around. I am not dignifying that with a response. You don't need to. Your pulse already did. She kept walking. She absolutely did not smile. Behind her, she heard Piers appear in the corridor and say, That went well, Your Majesty. And Anselm's reply, very dry, Your optimism, as always, is a comfort. Chapter 4. The Silence After. Margaret figured it out on the 3rd day. Imogen was in the library, cross-referencing the household security logs against the guest list for gaps in coverage, when she became aware of a mind watching her with unusual focus. Margaret was standing by the east window, holding a book she was not reading, and thinking, with the precise, multilingual deliberation of a 600-year-old strategist, a single sentence in English. "If you can hear this, human girl, look at me." Imogen did not look up. She kept her eyes on the security logs. Her hand did not shake. Her breathing did not change. "I thought so," Margaret thought, switching to German. "Your face changed when I thought in English. It was very small. A civilian would not have noticed. I am not a civilian." Then, in French, "I have been watching you for 2 days. You respond to things that have not been spoken. You anticipate questions before they are asked. You flinched when Renaud thought about the wine cellar. You smiled when the poet finished his 11th line. You warned the king about the Western delegate before the delegate had spoken a word." Imogen turned a page in the security log. Her heart was hammering. In the alcove beside the library, she heard Piers thinking about whether the curtains needed replacing, and the normalcy of it was an anchor she gripped with both hands. "You are a mind reader," Margaret thought. "And you have been reading every vampire in this house without consent." She looked up. Margaret's eyes were waiting for her. "You wanted to speak with me," Imogen said, as if nothing had happened. Margaret set down the book. She walked toward Imogen with the controlled grace of someone who had perfected the art of being dangerous without moving quickly. "You've been hearing our thoughts," Margaret said aloud. "Every one of us. Every private anxiety, every shameful memory, every unguarded moment. Without permission, without disclosure. I didn't choose this ability. The intrusion is the same regardless of your intent." Margaret's voice was even, but her thoughts were screaming underneath. Not anger. Fear. Ancient, marrow-deep, Inquisition-era fear. The memory of pyres, the memory of humans who knew, and what they did with the knowing. A human who can read vampire minds is the most dangerous creature in any room she enters. And you have been walking through this household as if you have a right to be here. I was hired to be here. You were hired as a security consultant, not as a spy. Imogen stood. Her legs were steady, her voice was not. "I have never used what I've heard against anyone in this household. You used it tonight. Against the Western delegate. I used it to protect your king." Margarita's jaw tightened. "That is precisely what makes you dangerous. You used a power no one knew you had to influence a political outcome. The fact that it was benign this time is irrelevant. The power exists, the precedent exists, and if the court discovers what you can do, every vampire who has ever had an unguarded thought in your presence will want you silenced. Permanently." "What does silenced mean, exactly?" Imogen asked. Her voice was steady, her hands were not. "Removed, exiled. Every vampire you have ever read would be informed. Every household you have ever assessed would know their thoughts were heard by a human who never disclosed her ability." Margarita's gaze was unwavering. "You would never work in the vampire world again, and some of them would want more than exile." "I do not want to hurt her," Margarita was thinking, and the thought was genuine. "I want her gone. There is a difference. I remember the difference. I have to remember the difference." "Leave this house," Margarita said. "Tonight, before anyone else notices what I have noticed." Imogen should have argued. She should have fought. But Margarita was not wrong. She thought about the groundskeeper thinking about his dead mother. She thought about Renaud's private grief over Brie. She thought about the young poet's 11-line sonnet and his desperate, silent hope that it was good enough. She had heard all of it, every private moment, every unguarded thought, and she had never asked permission, never disclosed, never given them the choice. "You're right," Imogen said quietly. "I'll go." She started packing. From down the hall, Pierce's thoughts arrived like a weather report for a hurricane. "She is packing. She is packing. I can hear luggage sounds. Luggage sounds are never good. In 2003, there were luggage sounds and then there was a fire. These are different luggage sounds. These are sad luggage sounds. Should I bring tea? Can tea fix this? Tea cannot fix this. Nothing can fix this. Except possibly the king, who is currently standing in his study not moving, which is either a sign that he is formulating a plan or a sign that he has broken. Both have happened before. In 2003, it was the second one. Do not think about 2003. She was halfway through folding her green dress into her bag when the door opened and Anselm Winter walked into her room. He was not composed. He was not masked. For the first time since she had met him, he looked like what he actually was. A 400-year-old predator whose territory had been threatened, whose household had been disrupted, and whose carefully maintained composure had been cracked by something he did not yet understand. Piers told me, he said. Piers thinks too loudly. She shoved a shoe into the bag. It's a recurring problem. Margarita came to me. She told me what you can do. Then you know why I have to leave. I know why you think you have to leave. She stopped packing. She's right. You know she's right. I've been reading the minds of everyone in your house for 3 days without telling them. Without asking. That's not security consulting, that's surveillance. You saved my territory. That doesn't make it ethical. He was quiet. Actually quiet, she noted. Not his usual deep silence. A different kind. The kind that meant he was choosing his next words with 4 centuries of care. When you touch me, he said, what do you feel? She looked at him. Everything. You're tired. You've been performing composure for so long you don't know what's underneath it anymore. You're afraid. But not of coups or political challenges. You're afraid of. She stopped. Of me leaving. The muscle at his jaw worked. Once. Most vampires think like they're shouting in a cathedral, he said. I have spent 4 centuries learning to be quiet. Every thought deliberate. Every impulse examined before it surfaces. It is possible that your ability cannot reach what I have buried that deep. So you're too controlled for me to hear. I am too controlled for anyone to hear. It is, I have been told, one of the more unsettling things about me. A pause. But the touch, the emotions you feel when we make contact, those are not thoughts. Those are older, deeper. The same channels a blood bond uses, but without the blood. You are receiving what I cannot suppress. A proto-bond. Something like one. Something that does not require permission, only proximity. He looked at their hands, not touching. And you are the only person in 400 years whose presence makes me want to stop being quiet. If you leave this house, I will spend the next 400 years in a silence that I now know is voluntary. She stood there, holding her half-packed bag, and she was furious at him for saying that, for meaning it, for being the one vampire in the world whose mind she couldn't read and whose feelings, when she touched him, were so honest they made her chest ache. You can't ask me to stay, she said. Margaret is right about the intrusion. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm telling you that I have already spoken to Margaret, and I have offered her a binding oath, an old one, the kind that carries a price. What kind of price? If you ever reveal what you have heard in any vampire household, the oath falls on me, my life, not yours. You bet your life. I bet my life on the only person whose thoughts I have never been able to predict. It seemed appropriate. She stared at him. That is the most reckless thing I have ever heard, and I once listened to a 300-year-old vampire think for 45 minutes about whether he could eat cheese again if he really believed in himself. Renaud has always been aspirational about dairy. This is not a joke. You have tied your existence to my integrity. Yes. We have known each other for 3 days. I have lived for 400 years. I know the difference between a day that matters and a century that doesn't. She was going to cry. She was absolutely, definitely going to cry, and she was angry about it, and she could hear Piers on the other side of the door thinking, "Is she crying? Is that good crying or bad crying? I cannot tell. Perhaps I should bring tea. Tea helps. Probably. Maybe. Perhaps." "Piers," she said, loudly enough to carry through the door, "I can hear you. Go away." A pause. Then, from behind the door, "I shall go and not think about anything whatsoever." "That's not how it works." Footsteps retreating, then, faintly, "Perhaps she'll stay. Perhaps this is the one that works. Perhaps." Imogen looked at Anselm. He was watching her with the terrifying patience of a creature that had decided to wait for something and intended to wait for as long as it took. "If I stay," she said, "there are things you need to know." "Tell me." She sat on the edge of the bed. He remained standing. The distance between them was the width of a confession. "If I were to turn," she said, "become a vampire, the ability would die. It's a human thing. It lives in the part of my brain that's mortal. I met one other empath, decades ago, who was turned." She went silent, permanently. "The frequency that lets me hear vampire thoughts, it requires being human to receive it." He absorbed this. "Then you won't turn." She had expected the words, but not the way he said them. Simply, certainly. As if the decision had been made the moment he understood the cost. "But I'll grow old," she said. "Yes. And you won't." "No. Doesn't that terrify you? I have had 4 centuries of immortality without anyone whose touch I could feel. I will take 40 years of feeling everything over 400 more of feeling nothing." She reached out. She took his hand. Not for the emotional download. Not for intelligence. Because she wanted to, and she was tired of pretending she didn't. The flash came anyway. Certainty. Not the performed certainty of a king, the real, trembling, hard-won certainty of a man who had decided, and who was afraid, and who was choosing to be afraid with her, rather than safe without her. She held his hand, cold against warm. 400 years against 28. The silence of his mind against the noise of hers. "Stay," she said. "I'm in your room. You would have to leave for me to stay." "That's not what you know what I meant." "I do." He looked at their hands. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist, where her pulse beat against his cold skin. "You should know that your heart rate is currently, Anselm, elevated. I am going to remove my hand. Please don't." She didn't. Chapter 5. The Signal. She did not go home. What she did was spend the next morning mediating between Anselm Winter and Margaret in the study, which was an experience roughly equivalent to refereeing a chess match between 2 people who had each been playing chess longer than most nations had existed. "Your concern is legitimate," Imogen said to Margaret, who was sitting in the armchair by the window with the posture of someone who had been right about things since before the printing press. "You remember the Inquisition. You remember what happened when humans knew. And you're right that my ability is an intrusion." Margaret inclined her head. 1 degree. The vampire equivalent of a standing ovation. "But the binding oath Anselm has offered protects every vampire I have ever read. If I reveal anything, he pays. Not with power, not with territory, with his life. That is not a symbolic gesture. That is a 400-year-old king telling you that he trusts me more than he trusts his own survival. The king's judgment in matters of—" Margaret glanced at Anselm. "Personal attachment," she thought, loudly and deliberately in Imogen's direction, "has been historically unreliable." 23 years without a personal complication," Anselm said mildly. "I was told that was a good run." "By Piers," Margaret said. "Piers once described a coup attempt as an exciting development. His calibration is suspect." From somewhere in the house, Piers's thoughts. "I stand by that assessment. It was exciting. It was also terrifying, but the two are not mutually exclusive." What I'm proposing, Imogen said, is a formal disclosure protocol. Every vampire I work with going forward will be told, in advance, that I have empathic abilities. They can choose whether to engage my services. Consent restored. Transparency established. Margaret looked at her. 600 years of suspicion versus 30 seconds of a proposal that actually addressed the problem. She is clever, Margaret thought. Dangerously clever. She saw my actual fear, not that she would betray us, but that she could. And she has offered the one thing that neutralizes the threat: choice. The humans get to choose whether to be read. That is not nothing. The disclosure protocol is acceptable, Margaret said. The binding oath is excessive. The binding oath stays, Anselm said. Not loudly. Not firmly. With the kind of quiet authority that made other vampires decide, independently and without discussion, that disagreeing with him was not worth the effort. Imogen's hand moved before she could stop it, reaching toward his arm, the instinct to touch him and feel what was underneath the composure, to know whether the certainty in his voice went all the way down. Her fingers stopped an inch from his sleeve. She pulled them back. Margaret was watching. And some things, she was learning, she wanted to know the slow way. Margaret studied him. Her thoughts, for the first time since Imogen had met her, softened. He means it. He truly means it. 400 years and he has finally found something he is willing to die for that is not this territory. She is the first thing in centuries that is actually new to him. Very well, Margaret said. She stood. She walked to the door. She paused. Miss Hale. Yes? Your proposal was well constructed. In my era, you would have made an excellent diplomat. Thank you. That was not a compliment. In my era, diplomats were the most dangerous people alive. She paused at the door. You are aware that Renaud has been thinking about Brie for 3 days. Tragically, yes. Tell him the artisanal blood-infused cheese program in the Vienna Coven has made progress. He will want to know. She is testing me, Imogen realized. She is telling me something she heard privately to see what I do with it, to see if I can be trusted with small things before she trusts me with large ones. I'll tell him, Imogen said. Margaret inclined her head again, 2 degrees this time. She left. Anselm looked at Imogen. You mediated a territorial negotiation with a 600-year-old vampire elder in under 20 minutes. I could hear what she was actually afraid of. That helps. You addressed her real fear, the one she wasn't saying. That's literally my entire skill set. It is, he said, and his voice did something she hadn't heard before. It gentled. Not softened, gentled. The way very old wood sounds when weight settles into it. It is the most formidable thing about you, and you use it like it's ordinary. She looked at him across the study. The fire was burning low. The morning light, which he should not have been in, except that the study windows faced north and the curtains were thick and the light was gray and indirect, caught the edge of his jaw and threw the planes of his face into sharp relief. Your curtains are not thick enough for direct sunlight, she said. These windows haven't seen direct sunlight in 40 years. The building across the street was constructed in 1986. The building across the street. I chose this house specifically for the shadow it provides. The previous building was shorter. I had to move in 1919. You chose your home based on the shadow of the building across the street? Obviously. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that starts in the stomach, and when she stopped laughing, he was looking at her with the expression of a man who had heard every sound the world could make and had just discovered a new one. What? She said. Nothing. He was lying. She couldn't hear his thoughts, but she could see the lie in his face, in the way his eyes stayed on her a beat too long, in the way his hands, which had been resting on the desk, went perfectly still. She walked around the desk. She stood in front of him. She reached out and straightened the collar of his shirt, which did not need straightening, and felt the full force of his emotional state pour through the contact like water through a broken dam. Joy. Actual, uncomplicated, 400-year-old joy. The kind of emotion that a creature who had outlived everything he had ever loved had forgotten he was capable of feeling. It hit her so hard that her eyes burned. "You're happy," she said. "I appear to be." "You sound surprised." "I am surprised. It has been a very long time." She held his collar. He held still. The cold of his skin against the warmth of her knuckles, the silence of his mind against the sound of everything she felt. "I'm going to kiss you now," she said. "I was rather hoping you would." She kissed him. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not a moonlit balcony, swelling orchestra, centuries of longing kiss. It was a Tuesday morning kiss in a study that smelled like old books and cold ash, and his mouth was cool and careful, and then not careful at all. And when she pulled back, his composure had cracked down the middle, and she could see 400 years of a man who had forgotten what this felt like, looking at her like she had just reinvented the concept. "Your heart," he started. "If you mention my heart rate, I will walk out of this room." "I was going to say your heart is the loudest thing in this house." "That's the same thing." "It isn't." He reached up and traced her jaw with the back of one cold finger. "It's the only sound I've wanted to hear in 400 years. Later, much later, when the gathering had ended and the delegations had departed, and Margaret had left with a formal nod and a private thought that Imogen chose to interpret as grudging respect, she sat on the sofa in his study and watched him attempt to send a text message. "It says, 'Searching for signal,'" he reported. "That means the Wi-Fi is out again." "The Wi-Fi is out again. We restarted the box yesterday." "Welcome to the 21st century." He looked at the phone. He looked at her. "How do I send a message without the invisible signals?" "You walk over to me and say it with your mouth." He considered this. Then he stood, walked across the study, sat beside her on the sofa, and said, "Stay." "I'm already staying." "I know. I wanted to say it with my mouth." She leaned against him. His shoulder was cold and solid and exactly the wrong temperature, and she didn't care. His mind was silent and would always be silent, and she didn't need to hear it. What he felt, she would learn the old way, by watching, by listening, by touching, by the slow accumulation of evidence that every human uses to understand another person when they cannot simply read their thoughts. It would take longer than hearing. It would take a lifetime. Her lifetime, finite and warm and loud. She reached for his hand. The flash came. Peace, not the composure he performed, not the restraint he maintained, but actual peace. The kind that a 400-year-old creature feels when the thing he was waiting for arrives and he doesn't have to wait anymore. "Your phone is still searching for signal," she said. "Let it search." "You're going to drain the battery." "Then I will sit here in the technological dark ages with you and communicate using my mouth and your extraordinary ability to hear everything I'm not saying." She smiled. His hand, cold around hers, tightened once. A ghost memory of a squeeze from a body that had forgotten most of its reflexes centuries ago. The last involuntary thing a 400-year-old predator could still do. She held on. Outside, the morning was gray and quiet and ordinary. Inside, the fire was low and the Wi-Fi was out, and the king of the Eastern Seaboard Territory was sitting on a sofa holding the hand of a woman who could hear every mind in the building except his. He was silent. She was listening. It was enough.